Hi, it's Marcus Collins from Mermaid Properties with your Arlington market update for May 2022. 5 months worth of data in, so we've got a lot to talk about this evening. So with that, let's get started and give you the update on what's happening in the market. So, relatively easy to get information today, but it's much more difficult to make sense of it, and ultimately to use it for your advantage. And so that's why we study the markets here pretty obsessively, I think it's fair to say. As you'll see in a minute, there's an awful lot of data, a lot of detail that we'll get to as we kind of go through this. So lots of information about what's happening in the Arlington market. And as you'll see, it's quite an interesting picture. Even as we kind of come out of COVID, it's a very interesting picture to see exactly what's happening in the market today. So I'm going to show you lots of graphs this evening that detail lots of different metrics that we follow. And if you're interested in where you find that, go to our website. We have a large number of different stats there. Inventory levels, absorption, average price, median price, sell price to list price ratio, and so on. And we have these for 50 different towns. So as well as Arlington, we have it for all the surrounding towns, almost down as far as Boston and kind of out to 495. So if you're interested in other towns, maybe you're thinking of moving into another town, you know somebody who's interested in moving into another town, take a look at the real estate statistics sections on our website. You'll see a lot of information, as I say, for about 50 different towns. As we're talking about Arlington this evening, there's also the 2021-22 market review. We produce this every year in January. It's mailed to everybody in Arlington in January. Cram-packed full of information, not only the graphs, but also some analysis, what we see that's happening, and also our predictions for 2022 are in there too. So there's lots of information both on our website as well as in this document. This is on the website as well. If you want a hard copy, feel free to reach out to us. We can absolutely get you a copy of that too. So this evening we're going to talk about single family and condominiums. I'll then give you a kind of overview of what's happening in the market, and then we'll get the crystal ball out and see where 2022 and 2020, or the rest of 22 and 2023 might take us. So first of all, let's take a look at single family market. We start off with this graph. This is the inventory level. So it's a snapshot, actually on the first of the month, of how many homes are available to buy. As with many of these graphs, the absolute numbers are less important than the overall trend. And so what you can see here is these high inventory levels from 2006 to about 2012. That's this area here between 9 and 12 is the crash, the so-called housing crash. High inventory levels, sellers looking to sell their homes, buyers somewhat reluctant to buy, and therefore the number of available homes, or the inventory level, was actually quite high. Dropped dramatically in 2012, 2013, and it's remained at those low numbers ever since. Peaked a little bit in 2019, as well as the second half of 2020. Actually, that was caused by a peak in the number of condominiums that came on the market, where sellers brought them on the market. Buyers were somewhat reluctant to buy, certainly in that second half of 2020. And as you can see, as we track into 21 and into 22, very low inventory levels. And that's really characterizes the market here in Arlington. Very low inventory levels in the last 5-10 years or so. That low inventory could, of course, be caused by too many buyers competing with not that many homes, or a lack of sellers in the market. So let's take a look at, first of all, the number of home sales. So let's say here, this single family home sales in Arlington. As you can see, slight reduction in those home sales in that kind of 2016 to 2020 timeframe, but we saw a big increase in 2021. A relatively large number of homes, larger than we've seen actually to date, coming on the market. I should explain that blue here are the existing homes. The greenish color is the new construction, and then the orangey yellow color, that is the teardowns. That is homes that don't come on the market, sell off market, and are then converted into new construction. So blue is existing, green is new construction, and that orange is those teardowns. So as you can see, we had in 2021 a large number of home sales. We track this forward to 2022. And what I'm showing here is the cumulative sales. And actually, it's not sales per se, it's cumulative under agreements. That way I'm backing out the 6 to 8 weeks between a home coming on the market, going under agreement, and finally closing. That's about 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm kind of backing that out, if you like. And as you can see, the blue there is 2021 and the orange color 2022. So it looks to be today anyway, and we have been throughout the 2022 tracking ahead of where we were in 2021. So it looks like we're going to get more home sales in 2022 than we saw in 2021, which was already a very high number, certainly higher than we've seen historically. So that's an interesting picture. So more home sales coming on the market. I'll talk more about why we think this is as I kind of get into the analysis section. Having said that, there are a large number of home sales or homes for sale, and therefore home sales. Days on the market is an interesting metric in that it begins to allow us to get a sense of how the buyers perceive the market. And as you can see, in 2021, we were at about 15 days, which is the lowest we've seen actually historically. So a very low number of days on the market. So homes are coming on, they are selling very quickly. Looking at the first 5 months of 2022 compared to 2021, as you can see, first 5 months of 21 we were at about 19. First 5 months of 22 we're at about 15. So it looks like we may track even lower as the year progresses in terms on the market than we saw in 2021. All of this while there are a larger number of home sales. So a very buoyant market with lots of homes coming on the market, and those homes selling and selling quickly and selling for a very high price. This metric, the sell price to list price ratio, let me kind of explain the metric. Imagine a home comes on the market for 800, sells for 800. That's 100% sell price to list price ratio. Tracking around anywhere between 102 and 104% historically. High levels of a ratio in comparison to surrounding towns. For example, a Winchester or a Lexington, they historically would have been 98, 99%. But 104% is what we've kind of seen historically. But look what happened in 2021. We jumped from that 104 to 109%. And interestingly, if you look at, again, compare the first 5 months of 21 versus 22, we were running at about 107% in 2021. We ended up at 109. First 5 months of this year we're at 113%. So if we kind of extrapolate those out and it continues in the same trend, it looks like that we'll get an average sell price to list price ratio. This is not the peak, this is the average, over 110%, perhaps even as high as 113, 115%, which is a very, very high level in comparison to what we've historically seen in Arlington, but also in comparison to what we've seen in other towns. We have seen inflated numbers in other towns. Lexington, for example, was at 106 in comparison historically 198, 99, but 109 very high, 115 is clearly very, very high. What that tells us is that it is very much a seller's market, even though we have an awful lot of home sales, higher than we've seen historically. Those homes are selling quickly and they're selling with competition, which is pushing the price higher. So that's kind of the nutshell, if you like, in a nutshell, where we are. You can see this ratio on this graph. The blue is the number of homes that sell. The orange line, I can kind of highlight it with my cursor here, that's the sell price to list price ratio tracked month by month. And as you can see, as we came into 2022, so that ratio jumped over 110%, and it's remained there ever since. In May, it looks like it's around about 117%. So that's where we got the average of about 117. And so very high levels of that sell price to list price ratio. Now, so undoubtedly with competition, with pushing the prices higher, the sell price higher, inevitably the average sell price has increased. And in fact, the average sale price this year running at about 1.27 million, which is a very high number. What you see in the graph here, blue is the yearly averages, up to 21 of course, and then the green are the monthly averages. And really we're interested in the running average. Now we've got 5 months worth of data, we're interested in the running average. And you can see that there, that's running at about 1.27 million. That's a big increase. If I look now at the median, which kind of tries to take out any distribution changes, any skew in the data, you can see that the median went from 950 to 1.17, which is a 23% rise, not quite quarter on quarter, half year on half year, 5 months on 5 months. So that's a very, very high increase in price appreciation. Much higher than we've seen historically, less than 10% in general. So that's a very, very high. And you can see that in the data here. We saw a substantial increase in prices in 2021 over 2020. But this jump here in 2022, if this continues, and it's been tracking at about that number for a couple of months now, looks like it will continue at there or thereabouts. That's a very big increase at 23%. And that explains in part why we're seeing more homes on the market. As sellers begin to understand that, oh, house price appreciation, house prices are at an all-time high, now would be a good time to bring my home on the market and take advantage of those high prices, profit taking if you will. And so that's why we're seeing more homes coming on the market this year than we saw last year, and actually this last year was higher than the year before that too. And so that's kind of what's driving the market. But even with those high inventory level or those high numbers of homes coming on the market, we've still got low inventory levels because there are a lot of buyers in the market soaking up those homes that came on the market. Let's turn our attention now to condominiums. Let's kind of take a quick look here. Condominium sales, they kind of fluctuate a little bit. As you can see in this data, this is 10 years worth of data. We did see a high number of condominium sales in 2021, certainly higher than we've seen previously, but there is a certain amount of variability in the data. So, you know, is that a one-off? I mean, what's happening here? Or is it just kind of normal trend that we see in condominiums? Again, let's take a look at the cumulative. And it looks like that we are tracking a little bit lower in 2022 than we saw in 2021. So if I go back, to go back to this slide, looks like today anyway, we're going to be somewhere between the 2020 sales and the 2021 sales. So we're going to kind of reduce to those but back to that very variable number. Compare that, of course, with single family, where we're seeing more sales this year than we saw in 2021. So looks like we're going to track and see less condominium sales in 2022 than we saw in 2021. That sale price to list price ratio, strong, but not as strong as the single family. You can see here, 2017, 2018 were highs of 105. We got 103%. Compare that to the 109 we saw in single families. I mean, actually, if you look at now the first 5 months of 22 versus 21, we're tracking at about 105, 103 last year. So based on that, if you extrapolate that out, it looks like we may well get a sale price to list price ratio running about 105%, which isn't dramatically higher. And some of this, I'll talk a minute in what the effects of COVID are, but condominiums in general are not as popular as single family. There is this tendency, specifically after COVID, somewhat before, but specifically after COVID, where single families have that premium because of their no shared space, turning around condominiums less of a premium because of the shared space and so on. So really not as popular as we've seen in the single family. Positive side of condominiums, of course, is the prices are lower. Here we are, this is the condominium prices, the average. You can see so far this year tracking at around about 850. Last first 5 months of 2020, we're only at about 710. So, a relatively strong increase. If I kind of look at the medians, you can see it's running at about 19%. It's high, not as high as we saw in single family, but certainly much higher than we've seen in surrounding towns. So somewhat softer market in the condominium, but I don't want to overplay that. As you can see, very high house price increases with 19%. And so some of that, of course, a consequence of less condominiums coming on the market, therefore less condominium sales. Some of that attributed because of the lack of the number of sales, and that, of course, lack of number of condominiums, that, of course, pushes the price up a little bit. So I would say if we kind of back that out, if we had the same number of condos on the market and selling this year versus last, it's likely that that 19% would be kind of tracked back, but it's very likely that it would be over 10%. So strong market, nowhere near as strong as we have in the single family market. So what's going on? What's kind of the big picture here in terms of what's happening? So we're in the tail end, if you like, of COVID, but we've still got some changes in housing demands to kind of work through the system. And really what we've seen here is that buyers, homeowners and buyers looking at the homes they were originally looking at, homeowners looking at the homes they're currently living in, saying they don't meet my requirements anymore. I would have been comfortable with a 2-bedroom condo, but actually because of COVID and now I'm reevaluating, I'm going to spend a lot more time in my home because I'm working from home 3 days a week, 2 days a week. Therefore, I'm valuing the home different, and therefore the housing requirements are changing. A little bit of profit taking, of course, we see that I think this year with Arlington, with house prices at that very high level, we are beginning to see some profit taking occurring. But it really is this changing demand that is actually driving the market. This is a consequence of COVID. So question is, what happened pre-COVID? What was driving the market pre-COVID? Why was Arlington still a very hot market in 2018, 2017? And we can explain that a little bit by looking at some demographics, the demographics of the United States. And here we have the demographics of the US. The bars represent the number of people in each different age bracket. Males are blue, females are red, but what we're interested in here is two bumps, if you like, two age groups where there are a large number of people. The higher one there, that's in that kind of 55-64 bracket, those are the baby boomers, children born after World War II, now beginning to think about retirement. And as they begin to think about retirement, of course, the next thing they think about is buying a smaller home. The lower yellow bar there are the millennials, the first-time home buyers. They are looking to move out of their rental in Somerville or Cambridge or Boston into their first home. And if you think about where Arlington's situated, and you think about Arlington, close to Boston, great commute into Boston, clearly, great public transport into Boston, a school system which is strong, if anything getting stronger, brand new high school just being completed in Arlington. It's got a lively town centre. You know, as we come out of COVID, the restaurants are back. I was in Arlington Centre just yesterday, and they're building up that area there. They're renovating that area around Arlington Centre. It's going to be a great outdoor eating area. And so all of a sudden, Arlington just ticks off all the boxes with commute, with schools, with the town centre. The one thing that is beginning to be a little bit of a challenge is the other prices. When Arlington was under 1 million, the average was under 1 million, we would absolutely say it was a first-time home buyers market. Now with the average running at 1.27 million, that's considerably higher. And there are some questions being raised around about whether the first-time home buyers can afford Arlington or whether they'll go to other towns. Today, anyway, as best we can see, and based on the data that I just showed you, still a very strong market. There are buyers able to buy at those high prices, and some of that, of course, is driven by the downsizers. They too, in for example, Lexington, Winchester, Belmont, the surrounding towns, higher priced homes there, they have seen price appreciation, and so that enables them to buy into the very strong market here in Arlington. And so you find Arlington kind of ticks all the boxes for both our downsizers and our first-time home buyers. Downsizers able to afford the prices we see in Arlington. First-time home buyers, some of them anyway, beginning to be kind of priced out of that market, but certainly not at a number that we're able to see that in the data today anyway. So that's kind of the driving force in the market. And when COVID has worked its way out, or the after effects of changing housing demands has kind of worked its way out of the system, we will revert back to this kind of underlying trend in terms of the number of what's driving the market. So that's kind of the key driver. We should, having talked about key market drivers and what's happening at a macro level, we should talk, of course, about interest rates. What I'm showing here is the weekly mortgage interest rates. What you see here in the orange bar is the 30-year fixed, and then the blue bar is the 5-1 arm. What's interesting, of course, and what everybody's focused on is this high increase we've seen in that last 2 months, realistically, getting us back to the levels that we last saw at the end of 2007-8, the crash, basically. That's beginning to have a material impact on buyers' ability to repay and therefore to pay the prices that we're seeing. Buyers are using some techniques, of course. I mean, one technique that we've seen quite frequently is buyers going back from a 30-year fixed, the preferred mortgage, to a 5-1 arm, specifically with our first-time home buyers, because realistically they're not actually going to be in the home for 7, 10, 15, 20 years. Likely they're only going to be there between 7 and 10, if that, and so they're okay with a 5-1 or a 7-1 arm. And so there are some techniques that buyers are beginning to use to kind of offset some of these rises in mortgage interest rates. Banks are becoming more competitive too, I would say. This rise in interest rates has really stopped the refi market. Nobody's refining right now. They all did it when the rates were really low. And so that's making banks, because of the lack of business, making them more competitive. And so that's happening. That's the absolute numbers. And what's interesting to think about what's going to happen moving forward. So blue here is the actuals all the way through to Q1 2022, and then green is the predictions. What's interesting, and I should give you a caveat on the predictions, it's likely that those predictions aren't very accurate. Certainly historically, the Mortgage Banker Association and the other ones that we kind of track, they haven't been that accurate. Although what is interesting, I think, and we should take note of, is that they see these interest rates continuing through the end of 23. So certainly the end of through this year, and actually potentially through the end of next year too. So we can anticipate these high interest rates they're not going to go back down in the same way they went up, excuse me. They are going to stay at these relatively high levels moving forward. So that's kind of interesting. There is quite a lot of discussion around housing bubbles and what's happening in the market. And this is where I do feel we need to be very cautious looking at national figures. The age-old adage, real estate is local, of course, is very true. And so it's very difficult to compare the situation we find ourselves here, inside I-95 into other parts of the world. And in fact, about a month or so ago now, I was flying into Houston. And what was interesting as you're flying into Houston, they have built the infrastructure for subdivisions, just like we're looking at the picture there. All the roads were in, the sewers, everything that was in. The houses were about to be built. And it seemed to be wherever I looked out of the window, I could see these subdivisions about to be built. If you compare that to the situation we find ourselves inside I-95, there's no free land, or very little free land. You can't just build houses. And so clearly the housing market here differs considerably from what it does in that case Houston, but also in other parts of the United States too. And so we need to be very cautious when we look at housing bubble, rising inventory levels, prices are stabilizing. Those kind of messages that are coming out from the national statistics don't really gel with what we're seeing locally. Now, having said that, it's kind of interesting to look at, if I look at the median increase we're seeing in Arlington, running at about 22%. So 2021 versus the first 5 months of this year, that's about a 22% rise in median sale price. That's a very high rise, and certainly more than double what we have seen historically. And there has to be a question, I think, at what, first of all, is that sustainable? And what are the implications for that rise in prices? Because thinking about mortgage interest rates are high, at the highest they've been since 2008. House prices are high. That's the kind of double whammy, if you like, for today's buyers. It's very expensive to buy because house prices are high. It's very expensive to repay, therefore to buy, because mortgage interest rates are high. And so will these high prices that we're seeing today, together with the mortgage interest rate, mean that we'll see a kind of slowing down, a correction, if you will, in terms of some of those price rises that we've seen? Interestingly, though, this is the Arlington data. Here's the same for Lexington. Lexington running at about 5%, much more in line with what we've seen historically. And so it is very much, real estate is local, but it's local in some respects at the town level. And so, is 22% sustainable? Will we see a correction as the effects of high prices and mortgage interest rates begin to kind of double down, if you like? Will that begin to slow this market down? In Arlington, in Lexington, it seems less likely because we haven't seen those high increases that we're seeing today in Arlington. So be cautious around the numbers you hear nationally. Real estate, is in Massachusetts anyway, very much at the town level. And so, we'll track as we move forward, as those interest rates begin to have a much more, have much more impact on larger and larger number of buyers. It'll be interesting to see whether we begin to see some kind of correction in some markets, but clearly not in others. So, what about the predictions? Where do we stand in terms of the predictions? Well, we've got more home sales in 2022 than we've seen historically. But having said that, it is still a seller's market because the number of buyers is at an all-time high, strong demand, really at all price points. And we've seen in Arlington some of those higher price points beginning to come into vogue. We are seeing a substantial number of home sales over $2 million. And in fact, when we do next year's, or this year's, if you like, in January next year, market overview, I'm toying with the idea of putting a luxury section in there. That is home sales over 2 million. So strong sellers market, even though we've got a large number of home sales. Buyers finding it as tough as ever to buy in the town, having to pay 10, 15, 20% over asking just to compete. That's kind of where we see the market today. Now, as we think about, what's the predictions, what impact will interest rates have? If interest rates remained at their low level, we would say this is going to be a very, very strong market for 2022. With interest rates having risen to the levels they have, there is a little bit of a, well, let's see how this plays out as the year goes by. We certainly have not seen it yet, although we're about 1 to 2 months into those high prices, and it takes 6 to 8 weeks for a home to go from under agreement to sale. So I think as we look at June and July's data, we'll begin to be able to say with some accuracy whether interest rates are beginning to have a material impact on prices or buyers' ability to pay, and therefore on prices. So we want 1 or 2 months worth of data to be able to kind of say where we think that's going to be, because we need to see what they sell for. But as I say, we'll see where that kind of lays out. So hedging our bets a little bit because of the sharp rise, or quick and sharp rise in mortgage interest rates. Will that begin to have an impact? As I say, we probably will begin to see that over that June, July, certainly into August. So that's kind of where we are. But today, as we look at the market, a very strong seller's market, a large number of buyers, with that kind of caveat where we need to see what interest rates doubling down with high sale prices is actually going to do to the market itself. So that's where we see 2022 in terms of our predictions. Thanks for watching. When we do these, we really do think that our clients deserve to be the smartest person at the closing table. And that's why, we all benefit becoming smarter about buying and selling. And that's why we look at all of these stats, specifically at the very local level. That's why we do these. So with that, I'll say thank you. Lots of information on our website. If you have any questions that you have around what's going on in the market, feel free to reach out to us. We have lots and lots of information, say not just about Arlington, but about other towns too. So with that, I'll say thank you and goodbye. Bye.